Bonjour tout le monde. Donc, je vous souhaite la bienvenue dans cette conférence qu'on offre dans le cadre des festivités du 20e anniversaire de Drogue, Santé, Société, une revue scientifique, donc on va vous expliquer un peu plus, et le 30e anniversaire du RISQ, le groupe de recherche et intervention sur les substances psychoactives du Québec. La conférence va durer environ une quarantaine de minutes. Et il va y avoir une période d'environ 10 à 15 minutes de questions animées donc par Joël qui va essayer de le faire avec le plus grand humour possible. Et donc comme la plupart d'entre vous, vous êtes en ligne, donc vous pouvez écrire dans le chat dans la partie questions-réponses ou à l'oral en levant la petite main. Si vous avez fait comme moi, assurez-vous que votre main soit jaune pour qu'on puisse vous voir, pour pas qu'il se fonde dans votre background. Donc, c'est ça. Et on va présenter un peu pourquoi on fait cette conférence-là. Donc, je vais vous présenter un peu qu'est-ce que Drogue, Santé, Société avant de passer la parole à Joël, qui va vous présenter le RISQ. Donc, Drogue, Santé et Société, donc c'est une revue multidisciplinaire francophone qui est accessible en ligne, qui est gratuite et qui est publiée biannuellement. Donc, vous pouvez accéder par le site web pour accéder à tous les articles qui sont déjà parus et aussi voir les appels aux auteurs et pour soumettre un article. Donc, maintenant, on a un beau site web tout neuf. Je vous conseille fortement de le consulter. Donc, DSS publie des articles révisés par les pairs. On publie à la fois des résultats de recherche inédits, ceci inclut aussi des revues de la littérature, ainsi que des articles de réflexion et autant sur la théorie que la méthodologie ou même la pratique clinique. Donc, on couvre en fait tout ce qui couvre l'univers des substances psychoactives, évidemment, mais malgré le nom, on accepte aussi des articles qui portent sur la pratique de jeux de hasard et d'argent, ainsi que tous les phénomènes et enjeux apparentés. Et on est ouvert à tout le monde, autant du domaine de la psychologie, de la médecine, de la santé publique, de la criminologie. Et notre comité de direction aussi couvre tout l'ensemble des disciplines possibles. Donc, le rédacteur en chef, c'est Jean-Sébastien Fallu qui va vous dire un petit mot dans quelques minutes. Et nous sommes donc 14 membres dans le comité de rédaction. On provient tous d'horizons un peu différents, donc qui permet quand même de couvrir l'ensemble du champ de la dépendance notamment. Et comme c'est un 20 ans, on veut quand même souligner qu'il y a eu beaucoup de gens importants qui sont passés avant nous au cours des 20 dernières années. Donc, un petit mot pour se rappeler de ces personnes qui ont contribué au bon succès de la revue. Et nous avons aussi un comité scientifique qui permettent justement de conseiller le comité de rédaction et s'assurer qu'on ne dérape pas trop dans la qualité scientifique. Et notamment un membre éminent de ce comité scientifique est Thomas Babor, que vous allez pouvoir entendre aussi dans quelques minutes. Et je vous le répète, donc on accepte toutes sortes de types d'articles, mais principalement des résultats de recherche, des réflexions théoriques ou de fond, ainsi que des réflexions méthodologiques. Et nous sommes aussi indexés dans PsycInfo, Sociological Abstract et la base francophone érudit. Nous publions à la fois des numéros thématiques, qui se cadrent dans un thème précis. Généralement, les éditeurs à ce numéro vont notamment contacter des chercheurs, des étudiants pour soit invités à soumettre un article, mais aussi l'appel d'offres est aussi lancé au large public sur le site web et aussi par les différents réseaux sociaux. Émilie Duris va vous relayer toute l'information lorsqu'on a des numéros thématiques à suggérer. On a aussi des numéros hors thème. Si vous voulez soumettre un article qui cadre vos derniers résultats de recherche, vous nous envoyez ça à dss.redaction@gmail.com et on fera un grand plaisir de gérer traiter votre article. Et pour dire qu'en 20 ans, il y a eu beaucoup de numéros qui ont été parus sur différentes thématiques, autant sur la légalisation du cannabis, les usages non traditionnels, les jeunes, la communauté LGBT. Donc, on couvre quand même beaucoup de thématiques et Juste pour vous dire qu'il y a 2 numéros qui s'en viennent. Donc, l'un qui est dirigé donc, par Jean-Sébastien Fallu, David Martin-Mulot, Myriam Laventure et Shelley Rose Hippolyte sur la prévention et la promotion de la santé en lien avec l'utilisation de substances, les jeux de hasard et l'argent et les écrans. Et un autre numéro thématique dirigé cette fois-ci par Annie-Claude Savard et Adèle Morvanou, entre gambling et gaming, les enjeux.
Sur l'équipe de recherche, le RISQ, donc recherche et intervention sur les substances psychoactives, équipe de recherche qui existe depuis 30 ans, mais qui est encore très jeune dans ses thématiques et dans ses travaux de recherche. Le RISQ se distingue, entre autres, par son intérêt envers les préoccupations des milieux cliniques. Donc, les chercheurs, les 17 chercheurs du RISQ, ne font pas de recherche fondamentale, mais font de la recherche clinique. C'est une équipe financée par le FRQSC qui est co-dirigée par moi comme directeur scientifique et 2 acteurs clés, donc des services publics, Martin Caméré et Vincent Marcoux qui dirige la QCID, donc des personnes qui sont au cœur des problématiques cliniques en addiction. Le RISQ est composé évidemment de nous à la direction, de Émilie comme coordonnatrice, Émilie Averdière, des collaborateurs, divers chercheurs, 16 chercheurs, 17, pardon, je me suis trompé tantôt, d'universités, d'établissements ou de milieux de pratique de différentes universités, des partenaires, beaucoup de CIS et CIUS, mais l'AQCID, l'AEDQ et d'autres partenaires qui sont présents avec nous, l'AQP Sud, Réseau, qui sont partenaires de l'équipe de recherche. Qu'est-ce que l'on fait? Donc, grosso modo, on s'intéresse aux substances psychoactives et l'idée est de mieux comprendre pour mieux agir auprès des personnes qui vont d'un usage à risque jusqu'à un usage très sévère de leur substance. Avec 3 grands axes de recherche, mieux comprendre les déterminants des trajectoires, développer et évaluer l'efficacité des stratégies de prévention et d'intervention, puis comprendre les grands modèles d'organisation et de planification des services. On fait toutes sortes de choses, telles que des conférences, comme aujourd'hui, on a la chance d'avoir Thomas Babor, un sommet, on participe au sommet sur les dépendances, évidemment, on le co-organise, on va dans les régions, on a des abrégés de recherche, on contribue activement à la revue Addiction, Recherche et Pratique, une revue professionnelle. Puis, on a des vidéos sur notre site web. Juste au cours des 4 dernières années, on a eu 10 000 visionnements de nos vidéos diverses de formation et de conférences. On a sur notre site web des instruments de mesure, des programmes d'intervention très bien développés par Émilie d'ailleurs, très jolis. Donc, vous pouvez aller faire vos recherches à ce sujet-là. Et si on regarde donc les activités qui s'en viennent tout prochainement, bon, on a eu une retraite rédactionnelle, le sommet, bon, ça va. On aura le 10 novembre une journée scientifique et grand débat public, toujours en partenariat avec Drogue, Santé et Société, et notre fameux séminaire annuel du CRI, qu'on appelle le CRI. Je crois que l'on passe maintenant à un petit mot d'accueil de Jean-Sébastien d'abord.
Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Merci d'organiser cette conférence-là avec nous. D'abord, rapidement, merci à Christophe aussi d'avoir si bien présenté Drogue, Santé, Société et contribué beaucoup. C'est le 20e anniversaire, on est très heureux, mais il y a beaucoup de transformations dans le monde de la publication scientifique, notamment avec toute la question du libre accès qui devient vraiment un défi pour beaucoup de revues. Puis au cours de l'année, il y aura des activités en lien avec ça. Je vous invite à rester connectés. Je veux quand même effectivement souhaiter la bienvenue à Tom. Tom, je serai pas long, juste dire que Tom est ce qu'on appelle une sommité mondiale, mais ça fait pas de lui quelqu'un de désagréable. Au contraire, très, très humble, très généreux de son temps. Et qui soutient d'ailleurs toutes sortes de revues. C'est grâce je dirais beaucoup à Tom si DSS je dirais, a adhéré à plein de normes en participant à l'International Society of Addiction Journal Editors, qui est une association qui soutient les revues et qui permet une réflexion sur les normes de publication. Et Tom est aussi un francophile. Donc voilà, je m'arrête là. Bienvenue à Tom. Merci.
Jean-Sébastien, alors, pour juste simplement illustrer le parcours de Thomas Babor, Tom Babor, je vais être en anglais pour la suite, is a professor emeritus and former chairman in the Department of Public Health Sciences, University of Connecticut School of Medicine in the United States. His academic training is in social psychology, addiction science, and psychiatric epidemiology. His research interests include screening tools, diagnosis and early intervention, and treatment evaluation, as well as alcohol and drug policy. And this is especially on that topic that we will talk today. He has worked with the World Health Organization on development of the well-known AUDIT and also the ASSIST, which are screening tests, a very well-known and very excellent test. He is editor-in-chief of the Journal of Studies in Alcohol and Drugs, co-author of Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity, which is the topic of today's conference. He is currently the director of the graduate certificate program in addiction science, which provides advanced training to graduate students and postdoctoral fellows in alcohol and drug research. Tom, welcome.
Merci beaucoup à tout le monde. Je regrette de n'avoir le courage à parler en français, mais je suis sûr que la traduction en ligne serait meilleure que la mienne. Donc, I'm going to talk today about why treatment services and treatment coverage are important for public health and social welfare. And I'm also going to consider the most effective policies for persons who have alcohol use disorders from a public health perspective. And we will cover not only policies that affect treatment and the building of treatment services for the population, but also policies that go beyond that and try to get people within the population to drink less, put less demand on the treatment system. We'll also compare treatment with other types of alcohol control strategies and interventions, and talk about how these strategies are interconnected. And finally, I will suggest that there's an additional role for those of us working in the area of addiction, which is advocacy for measures not only in area of clinical services, but going beyond that for services that will deal with alcohol and drug problems at the population level. So why are treatment services important for public health? Well, we know that more than 3 million deaths per year, mortalities of adults or people over age 15 are attributable to alcohol. And about 2/3 worldwide are individuals affected by drug use disorders. We know that the effective management of alcohol and drug use disorders could have a significant impact on premature mortality and morbidity, because so many of the people who die are heavy drinkers, and treatment would benefit them. And not only would that reduce the demand on health services in the population, but it would also have a salutary, a beneficial effect on individuals, families, and communities. Treatment coverage is a concept that is being addressed by the World Health Organization. Okay. And treatment coverage, as we know, is in most countries, even with well-developed treatment systems, is not sufficient to meet the demand, much less the number are affected in the population. There are some estimates that only a small proportion, perhaps 20% of the people with alcohol use disorders receive treatment. And the proportion is even lower in people who use drugs, who might be in need of treatment services. So contact coverage of treatment for substance use disorders is now an indicator that the World Health Organization is using to compare how well countries are doing to meet the demand or the potential demand for treatment. And access to treatment then becomes very important. In fact, I would argue that instead of spending most of our research efforts in the area of clinical services to the investigation of new treatments that are better than our old treatments, we would be much better off investigating how we can motivate people to get into services in the first place, because what we find from most of our research is that most treatments are beneficial. And even the superior treatments, like contingency management, only add incrementally to what is done by just getting somebody into treatment services in the first place. What I'm going to do is talk about the findings in the third edition of a book that is supposed to be released this month called Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity. And this book deals with the entire gamut of treatment, prevention, and alcohol control policies that have been investigated over the years in many parts of the world. So it's an international critical review, not only of the epidemiology of alcohol problems globally, but also of the interventions that have been studied systematically through scientific research. The book will be available free online. The authors don't take any royalties. The royalties go to translations in other languages. There will be a summary article in the journal Addiction that will be coming out soon. And we will have translations in several languages to be published in 2023. The book is at its core a review of the research that is relevant to a public health approach to alcohol problems. And the best way to describe how we approach alcohol problems is to describe what the public health approach is all about. The metaphor of a raging river is used by public health professionals to suggest that people tend to be pushed into problematic behavior and a premature mortality. They get pushed into that river upstream. And by the time they are drowning, somebody pulls them out of the water downstream, they're almost dead. And that's when we get these people in treatment. But the question is, should we, like that fisherman who one day is at the shore watching these people floating down the river and drowning, should we spend most of our resources and our time just pulling people out, or should we go upstream and find out what's going on? What is causing those people to get pushed into the stream? Is it genetics? Yes, that's part of it. Is it personality disorders, depression and anxiety disorders? That's part of it. But the big things that account for the changes in mortality and morbidity connected with alcohol at the population level are affordable prices. Another way of saying that is cheap alcohol, combined with increasing income, disposable income. The more money people have and the cheaper alcohol is, the more they drink and the more problems they have. Another upstream source of damage is convenience of getting alcohol, easy availability. A good example here is the tendency for the alcohol industry to promote home deliveries during the COVID epidemic. So not only do we have alcohol in the supermarkets and in the pubs and in the restaurants and everywhere else, but now we can just sit in our home and wait for somebody to deliver it. Another upstream contributor to premature mortality from alcohol is the culture of universal drinking, which is supported by aggressive marketing and advertising. So people see these images of people having fun, enjoying alcohol, laughing, and they never see the consequences on TV or on billboards, or they're encouraged to drink by sales on the internet. All of these things contribute to a culture of universal drinking. And in most countries, most people don't drink that much. Most people are abstinent. Globally, there are more people who can be considered abstainers than can be considered drinkers. But that's not the perception that we have in countries where there's this culture of universal drinking. And finally, what's pushing people into the river is lack of regulatory controls or the removal of effective regulatory controls, which is often advocated by the alcohol industry. So another way of looking at it is, what can we do to address these upstream causes of morbidity and mortality? And pricing and taxation measures have been with us for hundreds of years. Regulating the physical availability of alcohol through state monopolies or through sales taxes, excise taxes, regulating alcohol promotion, drinking countermeasures, modifying the drinking context to get people shut off from heavy drinking when they're in a bar, training bar staff. We know all about primary prevention education in secondary schools and colleges and universities, and finally treatment and early intervention. So we have a gamut of more than 70 strategies and interventions that have been investigated through scientific research, especially over the past 30 or 40 years, and the cumulative evidence can be arranged from upstream interventions to downstream interventions. Among these strategies and interventions, the authors of Alcohol No Ordinary Commodity, after reviewing the literature critically, developed a way of rating each of these interventions in terms of a set of criteria that led us to characterize them as either best practices or good practices or ineffective practices. And the best practices were interventions that were found to be high in effectiveness in reducing both alcohol consumption and alcohol-related harms. They were interventions supported by numerous studies in multiple countries, and usually the cumulative literature on these was organized into meta-analyses and systematic reviews. They are interventions capable of reaching their target groups. So if we discovered a magic cure, a drug that would stop people from drinking, but if it were extremely expensive or people wouldn't take it because of side effects, then it would not be considered a best practice because it wasn't capable of reaching its target audience. And finally, we look for interventions that were relatively low in cost to implement and sustain. Good practices were options with some research support, but not as much as the best practices. So here are some examples. In the area that we found seemed to have the best evidence supporting it, that was most capable of reducing population levels of drinking and harm, was pricing and taxation policies. We evaluated 5, 4 were found to be effective. Alcohol taxes in particular that decreased the affordability of alcohol, excise taxes or sales taxes, were particularly effective in driving down consumption. Good practices included minimum unit pricing, a price on a way of controlling price competition at the lowest level. So cheap alcohol is not allowed to be sold below a certain limit. And when you do that, you prevent alcoholics from buying the cheapest rot gut liquor that they can find in a liquor store. You prevent kids from getting cheap alcohol. Differential pricing by beverage. Often we tax spirits at a higher rate than we tax wine or beer. And that can be considered an effective practice. And when we target taxes at particular beverages that are causing harm, the energy drinks that had alcohol in them, for example, or sugar-sweetened types of alcoholic beverages, or now we're getting cannabis-infused beverages. By putting taxes on those beverages, we can prevent youth from migrating towards them. So what do we find as ineffective? Any policies that increase the affordability of alcohol. So when the alcohol industry argues we want to lower taxes, you can expect that if the taxes are lowered, people are going to drink more and you're going to have more people coming into treatment facilities. Here are some examples. Reductions in the frequency of alcohol-related disease mortality. And we know that there are 60 or 70 diseases that are attributable in part or in whole to alcohol. When in Alaska in 1983 and again in 2002, when the price of alcohol was raised through increased taxes, there was an immediate drop in alcohol-related mortality. And over the course of 10 years or so, because of inflation eroding the effectiveness of the tax increase, alcohol-related mortality increased again. And when the tax was raised again in 2002, you had another drop in alcohol-related mortality. Similarly, in another state in the US, Illinois, after a tax increase in 2009, there was a sharp reduction in late-night motor vehicle crashes. So we can see how increases in taxes can be paired with decreases in alcohol-related problems. And in many ways, taxation is a win-win policy. Not only does it drive down the prevalence of alcohol problems in a society, but it also generates revenue for the state. And that can be applied to the improvement of health in many ways. We know a lot about how to target the tax increases on the volume of pure alcohol consumed in order to have maximum effect on health. We know that it affects heavy drinkers as much as light drinkers, and increased taxes do not necessarily have to increase illicit or informal production if enforcement is built into the legislation. And we know that minimum unit pricing are policies are effective ways to control the consumption of cheap alcohol. The second upstream policy that has been shown to be a best practice is regulating physical availability of alcohol. This is done through state monopoly systems and through licensing systems. State monopolies control the time of day when you can purchase alcohol and the types of beverages you can apply, and they control for age more effectively than when alcohol is sold in restaurants and bars and in retail outlets. And this type of policy has been eroding across Canada, across the United States, and in Europe over the years. But it nevertheless has good evidence for effectiveness. We evaluated 15 policies related to the controls on physical availability, limiting the hours of sale, the places of sale, are effective ways of driving down consumption. We're not arguing for total prohibition, although in some countries where there is religious, cultural support for abstinence, it can be effective, at least prohibition, a total ban on alcohol. Using policies to impose limits on the age of purchase, as was done in the United States, when the age of purchase was raised from 18 to 21, is another effective type of policy that limits access to alcohol, easy access and availability. So what we know is that controls on availability at the population level can be a very effective way of driving down alcohol-related problems. Here's a dramatic example from Brazil. In 2002, the city of Diadema imposed a curfew on the sale of alcohol. Prior to that, and here are data from 1995 up to 2002, the mortality rate from homicides related to alcohol was among the highest in the world for a municipality. So people were getting killed in part because the police concluded pretty obviously that the bars were open 24 hours a day, and there were very little controls on people getting drunk and going out and getting into fights. The density of outlets was such that people were pouring out of bars and getting into fights. When they imposed a limit on the sale of alcohol at 11 o'clock at night, there was a dramatic drop in mortality from homicide. Not only that, but centers for managing families and spouses who had been subjected to physical abuse saw a drop in demand for their services. So again, we can see how limiting physical availability can have an impact on alcohol-related problems. The third upstream area where our review of the literature led the authors to conclude that we have a best practice that's worth investing in is the area of alcohol marketing. And we evaluated 3 types of policies. A complete ban on alcohol was found to be a best practice that could be recommended. Just shut off internet marketing as well as marketing on TV and radio, billboards, and point of sale. If you can stop that kind of marketing, you're very likely to discourage young people from starting to drink alcohol early. and you're likely to prevent young people after they start drinking from progressing to binge drinking. We did a special issue of the Journal of Studies on Alcohol that systematically reviewed the literature in all areas where there's research on alcohol marketing. And what we found is evidence according to established criteria for causality that alcohol marketing can be considered a cause of early drinking in adolescence and progression to binge drinking. So exposure to marketing, particularly online marketing, can be considered a cause of some aspects of adolescent drinking, and by inference, a ban on alcohol marketing should remove that cause. Partial bans are much less effective than total bans. We don't have a lot of research on total bans, so we relied more on what had been learned from research on banning tobacco marketing in different countries. And when that happens, the consumption of tobacco products goes down. There's another reason to consider a ban on marketing. There's good research at a neurobiological level that alcohol-related images, words, music, and particularly sights and sounds and smells can stimulate alcohol craving in people with alcohol dependence. So we have good evidence now that alcohol marketing can be considered a cause of craving, and there's a strong link between craving and relapse in abstinent alcoholics. So that's another good reason for a total ban on alcohol. Again, industry solutions that are proposed, like we don't need controls, we can monitor and we can prevent content through industry self-regulation. That, through research, some of it conducted in Canada, has been shown to be an ineffective practice. Other good practices include modifying the drinking context, training bar staff, imposing voluntary house policies, enforcing regulations, community mobilization. These things are good, but they're expensive to do, and they require a lot of resources. Education and persuasion, prevention strategies. We found a number of good practices, including anti-drunk driving campaigns, targeted prevention programs at high-risk kids, family interventions in school settings, computer-assisted interventions with subpopulations of heavy drinkers. All of these can be considered good practices, but they don't necessarily add up to driving down mortality rates. Industry-sponsored programs and campaigns are generally found to be the ones that are ineffective. So what we've learned here is interventions focusing on high-risk youth and which involve families are more likely to deter youth drinking. Finally, early intervention and treatment. We found a number of strategies that were rated high in effectiveness, including brief interventions for non-alcohol dependent drinkers, medical detoxification, behavioral and psychosocial treatments. There's been a considerable amount of research there. Contingency management, rewarding people with alcohol dependence in a treatment center who report in aftercare meetings with verified abstinence criteria. That has been shown to be a highly effective way to promote treatment attendance as well as reduce relapse. Pharmacological treatments, there's been some progress there. Naltrexone, topiramate, and acamprosate, or drugs that can be prescribed, but their effectiveness is about the same as psychosocial treatments. And mandatory and coercive treatments under some conditions can be effective. So how are these strategies interconnected? The population level ones and the ones that are targeted at individuals. Well, taxing and pricing and minimum unit pricing can reduce the amount of alcohol consumed by heavy drinkers and alcoholics. So that's likely to have an impact on treatment. Availability controls can reduce the convenience of acquiring and consuming alcohol. And that, again, might contribute to an environment where people who are in recovery are feeling less tempted to drink, because when they go into a supermarket, there's not a lot of alcohol all over the place encouraging them to drink. Marketing controls can reduce the chances of relapse. Drink driving policies can motivate treatment seeking, and modifying the drinking context can reduce the opportunities for heavy drinking. So there are connections, interconnections between the upstream policies and the downstream policies. And if we put them all together, we're likely to have a greater impact than if we just focus on one or the other. A good example is people with alcohol dependence. As I mentioned, marketing messages are processed differently by heavy drinkers. The more someone drinks, the more likely they are to pay attention to alcohol cues. And that in turn leads to increased craving. When the cues are not available, they don't experience as much craving. So visual cues, auditory cues, when they're removed, are not triggering the neurobiological mechanisms linked to neurotransmitters, which anticipate the reward of drinking. Does the alcohol industry proactively target heavy drinkers? There's good evidence for that. Digital platforms, which are designed to communicate with people all over the world, are also designed to learn the individual preferences of the people they use them. So each of us is being monitored on the internet constantly by these platforms, which are looking at our preferences. If your preference is alcohol, if you're buying alcohol online, if you're viewing people who drink, or you're communicating with other people and you're using words that suggest drinking, you're likely to be targeted with ads that would encourage you to buy alcohol and to drink. When we had a conference in Dublin at the beginning of the COVID epidemic in 2020, there was a group of students, this was an alcohol policy conference, a group of students came from one of the most abstinent states in the United States, from Utah. They flew over to Dublin. They were there because they were invited to do a presentation on a prevention program that they had developed. And obviously, these were smart kids, very committed to either sobriety or to preventing alcohol problems, but they had spent a lot of time on the internet investigating alcohol. When they got off the plane at the airport and opened up their iPhones, they began to be bombarded with messages telling them where they could drink in Dublin. And these were kids 16 or 17 years old. So these digital platforms and these ways of targeting people can be very harmful to public health if they are not controlled, and they're difficult to control because what we need is an international convention rather than just national controls. People in recovery say they're bombarded with alcohol ads all the time on the internet. And in order to move from efficacy and effectiveness studies to the interventions at a population level, we need to improve early intervention and treatment and do it in a way that is compatible with what we've learned about the upstream courses. There are many treatment policies that are valuable, including planning and financing, monitoring who's coming into treatment, workforce development, linkages with criminal justice and mental health and social welfare. We can improve those policies, improve our structural resources, which are programs and facilities and personnel, and we can therefore improve the effectiveness of our treatment. And if we improve how the system is functioning, make it more economical, more efficient, we should be able, more equitable, we should be able to improve effectiveness. That would affect population health. The qualities that are important are discussed in a monograph, a special issue of the Journal of Studies on Alcohol that Professor Tremblay and others have edited for the Journal of Studies on Alcohol. And these system qualities can be improved in order to improve the effectiveness of treatment to maximize the population impact. There's good research, not good research, there is preliminary research that by improving our services, we can have an impact on population health, but it's not sufficient. We know that the more people who are in treatment and the lower the rates of cirrhosis in some localities. We have some research that suggests that AA membership and the amount of treatment can be linked to decreased alcohol problems. And some research that indicates, certainly in the area of drug opioid overdose deaths, that the more opioid maintenance treatment available, the lower the mortality rates. So there's preliminary evidence that increases in services can have an impact because they're affecting, if they can affect so many heavy drinkers. There are modeling studies using data from countries in the EU. One study suggested that by increasing treatment coverage from the existing 10% to 40% could lead to a sharp decline in alcohol attributable mortality. Other studies in the UK have come to a similar conclusion. So we have modeling studies and some observational studies that suggest that treatment could have, by increasing treatment services, we can drive down alcohol-related mortality. But it's not going to be sufficient to solve the problem. We cannot treat our way out of alcohol problems, which are considered to be one of the most important, significant risk factors for non-communicable diseases. And we can't do it just by brief interventions and more treatment services because of the low treatment coverage in most countries and the high cost of services. So treatment is not going to be the sole answer. But we can do a lot to improve it. better integration of screening and brief intervention in primary care, universal screening in healthcare settings, using e-health technology to do screening, and artificial intelligence to give advice are all ways that we can improve the effectiveness of early intervention. Screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment, media campaigns can attract more people into treatment. And we could consider co-opting the responsible drinking message of the alcohol industry. What is their message? Their message is drink, 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 and drink responsibly. And they know from their research that the interpretation of drinking responsibly is what the person himself or herself is drinking. So if you're drinking 10 drinks a day, that's responsible drinking. And so it's a meaningless concept without a definition. And the definitions that are being proposed through guidelines and warning labels that have been tested might be a way of co-opting that message so people have a better understanding of the levels of risk. How can treatment services be improved? E-health technology, artificial intelligence can do treatment, and importantly, they'll improve access. So get more people into treatment through electronic technology, which is low in cost. Improve the efficiency, economy, and effectiveness, and equity and continuity of care of our existing programs. Support marketing bans to prevent relapse. Enforce drink driving laws to get more people into treatment. Dedicate alcohol taxes to fund treatment and prevention services. Draw attention to the cost implications to influence policy. When you do cost analyses, you find that taxes only account for 1/6 of the cost in some high-income countries of alcohol to society. So somebody, probably the people who live in those countries, is subsidizing the alcohol industry for the profits they draw, because the industry realizes enormous profits from the sale of alcohol. They take the profits, the state pays for the damage. So all we need to do is advocate for financial responsibility and advocate for upstream policies to support treatment effectiveness. We also need better research to document what the cost savings and the benefits would be. So in conclusion, ultimately, policymakers and the general public want to know two things about treatment services. They want to know, does treatment work? And does it work enough to alter the drinking career of somebody who starts usually in their 20s and winds up in the worst case scenario as a mortality statistic when they're 40 or 50 years old, or on average dies 5 or 6 years younger than they would if they weren't drinking. The second question is, can the totality of services reduce the cost of alcohol to society in terms of disease and crime and violence, traffic fatalities? Those are the questions that policymakers want answers to. The answers to the first question are that we know enough now that clinical services work. They reduce consumption, but not for everybody. And people relapse, and we have to keep on monitoring them and intervening. So it's a costly solution, but it can be improved. For the second question, the evidence is suggestive, but not definitive, to the extent that we have these universal measures. Higher taxes make alcohol less affordable, control the physical availability and the a psychological environment through marketing bans, we're likely to drive down the rates of alcohol problems, including people who demand treatment services. So, in conclusion, bon anniversaire, sans alcool, peut-être, and thank you very much for your attention.
Merci, Tom. Alors, c'est la période de questions. Je t'invite à rester à l'avant. Alors, est-ce que dans l'auditoire à distance ou dans la salle, il y a des questions? Question can be formulated in French or English.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your talk. And I wanted to go on to the alcohol marketing. I was wondering, so you talk about ads online, stuff like that, but I was wondering, the marketing that is happening insidiously into culture, for example, movies, TV shows, music, how do we, should we, and how do we regulate things that happen in pop culture? Because that's how alcohol is valorized in some way, because in the songs that the young people are listening to, the movies they watch, you have this culture of alcohol is a desirable thing to do, and you even have a bunch of movies is about looking for alcohol and how it's the ultimate goal.
Right.
So what should we do something about this, and how should we do it?
Yeah. Great question. When you think about how pop culture was created traditionally, and we're talking not in ancient cultures, but in modern cultures, even, 50, 60 years ago, but perhaps even before the advent of advertising. People learned about drinking from their parents, from their families, from their community, from the ideas within the culture. So it was defined, the culture was created organically from a mix of different influences. Now, pop culture is controlled by marketing. And in particular, it's controlled by the alcohol industry. Transnational corporations globally are trying to transform the way people think in Asia, Africa, Latin America, to get them to think about Western concepts of heavy drinking. And the way that we're going to deal with that is take the profit motive out of promoting alcohol. The alcohol industry now invests enormous amounts of money, more than most other producers of different commercial consumer products, in creating images of alcohol. If we can ban alcohol marketing and take away the profit motive, we're likely to allow this organic process to evolve naturally rather than to be created by an industry that is mainly interested in getting money for what they're doing.
But I was wondering more about the side of the artist. I mean, the songwriter who writes about alcohol, or the movie director who writes the screenplay about. So, and that promotes alcohol use in the.
So those movie directors are people who are influenced by the industry. The actors, Sylvester Stallone, who made these Rocky pictures, was paid $500,000 to promote tobacco products. And other actors were paid to promote alcohol products. The producers sometimes do it as an exchange, rather, you do a favor for me and I'll do a favor for you to put this brand, Budweiser is a good example, into a movie. So it doesn't happen by accident. A lot of TV producers are heavy drinkers, and they think that it might be good to show alcohol as part of a normal interaction, but that is very artificial. It's either a reflection of their lifestyle in Hollywood, or more likely the influence they've had to introduce alcohol products, including product placements in movies.
Thank you, Tom. I think we have time for one more question. We are about at the end of the content, but there's still have time for one. Yeah,
of the voice.
Or another one. Go.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. I appreciate very much this colossal, I would say, presentation. It's a beautiful overview of years of progress in this field. So I have two sort of related questions. One refers to how I frame this, which is an interaction between the state and industry. So you mentioned, which is consistently coming in the research, that we should increase taxes. So I would like to know more about your personal thoughts in terms of increasing punishments towards the alcohol industry, which is rather different. And then in the second aspect of it, that is more related to the state, how these alcohol policies talk to other policies, let's say tobacco policies, substance use policies, and so on.
Okay, for the first one, regarding punishment, we have good evidence from studies of alcohol-impaired driving policies that punishment is not an effective strategy. So when you increase the punishments on drunk driving.
No, I was referring to the industry.
Not
punishment
to the industry.
Okay. So the punishment to the worst, to the industry.
Okay. For the industry, it's going to be difficult, but not impossible. The book, Alcohol, No Ordinary Commodity, devotes several chapters to the alcohol industry and to alcohol policies. And the industry can be controlled, particularly in countries like the Nordic countries that have taken the profit motive out of selling alcohol through state monopolies. The industry can be controlled by making them pay more for the damage they do or they cause, and the cost to society by increasing taxes. The punishment of the industry has been attempted. There have been egregious examples of the big producer organizations going into Thailand or India and bribing people, and they've been fined for the bribes. The costs of those punishments are minuscule compared to the profits that they derive. But the industry is very concerned about their public image. So they spend significant amounts of money doing good deeds. They call it corporate social responsibility. And they do it not because they're philanthropists. They do it as a form of advertising to to improve their image. So if we can shame them by pointing out the illegal behavior, the damage that they cause, we're in a better position to influence public opinion in addition to sound alcohol control policies. The example is countries like Lithuania, Ukraine, and Russia, where in recent years there have been changes in their policy, increasing taxes, bans on marketing, restrictions on physical availability. When those are improved, when they're implemented, we can see sharp declines in consumption and increases in life expectancy. In the Russian Federation, there was an increase in life expectancy of 4 or 5 years over a short period when they put into effect a number of alcohol controls. And that's a way of dealing with the alcohol industry. We don't want to eliminate them. We don't want to prohibit them, but we need, I think, to limit their expansion.
Joël, Jean-Sébastien qui avait levé la main.
Jean-Sébastien, certainement. À toi, Jean-Sébastien.
Oui, merci. Hi, Tom. I would like to have an hour for my comments and questions with you, but I'm gonna try to be quick. It is about curvilinear relationships and iatrogenic and side effects of measures. Regarding your slide on the upstream sources of the damage and solutions in terms of cause, disposable outcome, and cheap alcohol, but poverty is also a cause of problems, including SUD. Availability is of course necessary, but there are products like solvents in our homes that are very accessible, but not very much used because people find them risky. Lack of regulatory controls is a cause, but there's also maybe a problem with too harsh regulatory controls. And I'm also thinking about other causes in terms of stigma, mental health, trauma, and poverty, as I mentioned. And in terms of solutions, regulating physical availability is a good thing, but if it's too low, accessibility I've shown to have negative effects even on other outcomes. And I would also like to talk about persuasion measure that I think it's being, it's partial and non-exhaustive and can discredit the message if it's not well targeted. And what about, side effects and iatrogenic effects? And as you mentioned, regulatory measures are dependable on culture and public opinion. I think there may be also a curvilinear relationship between stigma and promotion in terms of, if reducing promotion is a good thing, but if we're, leaning towards stigmatizing people, I think it could be a problem. Discouraging marketing might seem to be a very good measure that cannot have negative effects, but what about other measures? Isn't a balance to find to tackle core causes? Thanks.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I think you almost answered your own question. There are unintended consequences of population universal measures. They're not welcome. People don't like taxes, and they don't like big government to be acting like a nanny state, telling people what to do. They like to make their own decisions. But as things have developed with these powerful transnational corporations now dominating the distribution of alcohol worldwide, there are about 10 companies that control hundreds, thousands of brands. We're in a position to have, and with the research that has come with looking at where the damage is most costly, we're in a position to estimate what the alcohol industry is doing. And I think these measures can be implemented as they have in many countries. And we know in Canada, the United States, all over the world, we have controls on availability through licensing systems. We have taxation. And as long as it's not dramatic, and as long as it's done with good support, and as long as policymakers can understand now that it's going to save substantial amounts of money, we're in a better position, I think, to use these levers to improve public health and avoid those unintended consequences that you mentioned.
Donc, je pense que ça va terminer. On a déjà un peu dépassé notre temps. Je voudrais donc remercier grandement Tom pour cette magnifique présentation, d'avoir inauguré notre année de 30e du RISQ et 20e anniversaire de Drogue, Santé et Société. Donc, merci beaucoup, Tom, pour cette magnifique présentation. Merci à tous les spectateurs. Cette conférence sera rediffusée sur nos sites web respectifs. Donc, merci beaucoup. Merci.